At Thanksgiving dinner in Boise, my mom lifted her glass, looked straight at me, and said, "You're the laziest one at this table. Just look at your sister." The room waited for me to shrink. Instead, I set my hands flat against the table and said calmly, "Then this lazy one will stop paying $4,500 of her rent every month. If you had been sitting in my chair, would you have stayed quiet or finally let the truth land?" It didn't start at a dinner table. It started in a quiet house in Boise long before money ever complicated anything. Back then, the rules weren't spoken out loud, but you could feel them in the air. Noise mattered. Movement mattered. Looking busy mattered. And I learned very early that being steady and silent didn't. As a kid, I moved carefully, not timid, just careful. I figured out which floorboards creaked and which doors needed to be closed slowly so they wouldn't snap back against the frame. I learned how to finish my chores before anyone thought to check on me. I would clear the kitchen after dinner, wipe the counters twice if something felt sticky, take out the trash before it overflowed. If a permission slip needed signing, I left it on the table with a pen already clipped to it. If a project was due, it was done days before anyone asked. The strange part is, I never thought of it as going above and beyond. I thought that was just what you did. You noticed what needed to be done and you did it. Quietly, efficiently, without turning it into a production. Belle learned something different. We grew up in the same house, under the same roof, with the same parents. But she figured out a secret I didn't understand until much later. She understood that effort to count had to be seen. If she cleaned her room, she didn't just close the door and move on. She'd call out, "Mom, I finally tackled that mess in there. It took forever." She would describe the dust, the rearranging, the emotional weight of it. By the time Mom walked down the hallway to peek inside, the room looked the same level of clean mine always did, but Belle had a story attached to hers, and stories stick. Whenever something in the house ran smoothly, I felt relief. Belle felt opportunity. If dinner was ready on time, she would mention how she'd helped stir the sauce earlier. If a school project turned out well, she'd explain how stressed she'd been getting it just right. She didn't lie, not exactly. She just knew how to narrate. Mom listened to tone more than outcomes. If something sounded exhausting, she assumed it must have been. If someone's voice carried strain, she believed the strain meant effort. Belle mastered that rhythm. A sigh at the right moment, a shake of the head, a quiet, "I've just been so busy." And Mom would soften, "You work so hard." I don't remember ever hearing those words directed at me. Dad was different, but not in a way that helped. He respected what he could see clearly. If someone looked active, moving fast, talking fast, juggling visible tasks, he assumed they were carrying weight. He came from a world where hard work was loud. It left sweat on your shirt and tension in your shoulders. When he looked at me, he saw calm. Calm in our house translated to easy. If I was sitting at the table finishing homework without complaint, that meant it wasn't difficult. If I wasn't asking for help, that meant I didn't need it. If I wasn't announcing what I'd done, that meant it couldn't have required much. No one ever pulled me aside and said, "You're lazy." Not at first. It showed up in smaller ways. Little jokes when I chose to stay home instead of going out. Comments like, "Must be nice to have such an easy schedule." A raised eyebrow when I didn't rush to defend myself against something. Belle had already narrated first. Expectations that hovered low as if no one imagined I could carry more than the bare minimum. I wasn't called lazy because I failed. I was called lazy because I didn't perform. That's a subtle difference, but it changes everything. There's a kind of invisibility that forms when your work prevents problems instead of fixing them after they explode. When nothing breaks, no one asks who held it together. When the house runs smoothly, no one wonders who noticed the small cracks before they spread. Belle would step into the center of a moment. I would step to the side of it. She grew comfortable in the spotlight of recognition. I grew comfortable in the shadow of responsibility. And slowly, without any dramatic argument or big turning point, the word lazy started attaching itself to my name in ways that felt almost casual. Why can't you be more driven like your sister? You need to push yourself. She's always hustling. Hustling. That word floated around our house like proof of worth. I wanted to ask hustling toward what, but I didn't, because by then I had already learned something important. Correcting the narrative felt dangerous, not physically dangerous, emotionally. It felt like stepping into a current that would only drag me further from being understood. So I stayed quiet. I kept finishing tasks before they were assigned. I kept smoothing over small conflicts so they never grew teeth. I kept showing up consistently without fanfare, without commentary. And the label settled in. Lazy. It didn't match my reality, but it matched their interpretation of me. And in a house where interpretation mattered more than observation, that was enough. Looking back, I don't feel anger toward the girl I was. I feel tenderness. She thought that if she just kept doing the right thing long enough, someone would eventually notice. She believed consistency would speak for itself. But consistency whispers, performance projects. In our family projection one, by the time we reached our late teens, the roles felt fixed. Belle was the driven one, the visible one, the one who really tried. I was the quiet one, the background one, the one who apparently could be doing more. And maybe the hardest part wasn't being misunderstood. It was realizing that the more stable I kept everything, the less anyone saw the effort behind it. Peace has no applause, and in that house in Boise, applause was everything. By the time we were adults, the roles hadn't changed. They had just grown up with us. I built a life the only way I knew how, quiet on the surface, solid underneath. I chose work that rewarded consistency instead of charisma. The kind of job where if you do it well, nothing dramatic happens. No applause, no spotlight, just systems that don't break, deadlines that get met, problems that disappear before anyone else realizes they were there. My days were structured, focused, calm from the outside, but inside, my mind was always moving, solving, anticipating, rechecking. I learned how to stay late without announcing it, how to fix something without attaching my name to the solution. Over time, that steadiness built something real. Insurance covered savings. Growing bills paid on time, a sense of control I had never felt as a child. There's a quiet pride that comes from knowing your life rests on your own discipline. No drama, no spectacle, just structure. Belle moved in the opposite direction. Her world revolved around visibility, energy, rooms full of people. She stepped into roles that depended on timing, presence, and how others felt about her in the moment. There were events, meetings, opportunities, photos. She shifted from one possibility to the next, always chasing something just ahead of reach. When she talked about her day, it sounded electric, urgent, packed with momentum. There were connections being made, big things coming, doors almost opening. Her stories came with movement, and movement in our family had always looked like effort. At dinner, if someone asked what we did, I would explain mine simply. I'd talk about deadlines, projects, long stretches behind a screen, solving things that weren't obvious to anyone else. I tried to describe the pressure without complaining the responsibility without dramatizing it. The conversation rarely stayed there. It would drift almost automatically back to Belle, to the event she attended, the room she walked into, the person she might collaborate with next month. Mom's eyes would light up the way they always had. She'd nod, lean forward, ask follow-up questions. That sounds so exciting. Dad would listen closely too, because he could picture it. A room, a crowd, movement. He understood visible exhaustion. He respected hustle he could see. When he looked at my life, he saw a chair, a desk, a computer screen, a calm face. To him, calm meant easy. He never meant to dismiss me. I don't believe that, but he trusted what was tangible. If someone appeared busy, they earned respect without further inspection. If someone seemed steady and composed, he assumed they weren't being pushed very hard. So the pattern repeated itself in adult form. Belle described her effort. I delivered results. Mom translated excitement into bravery. She heard momentum and interpreted it as ambition. If Belle said she was overwhelmed, Mom believed it without question. The emotion in her voice became proof. When I mentioned staying late to stabilize a project or fixing something no one else had noticed, the response was polite but distant. A small nod, a quick, "That's good." Good, not impressive, not admirable, just good. Over time, something shifted inside me. Not resentment, not even jealousy. Clarity. I began to see that in our family, truth mattered less than narrative. Facts didn't win, volume did. Consistency didn't impress, performance did. That realization didn't hit all at once. It settled in slowly, like dust you don't notice until the light catches it. I would sit at those dinners and feel myself fading into the background of conversations about my own life. Not because I lacked substance, but because my substance didn't sparkle. I started speaking less, not out of insecurity, but out of efficiency. Explaining my work in ways they couldn't really hear felt exhausting. Offering details that went nowhere felt pointless. I learned to keep parts of my life private because sharing them only created space for them to be minimized. There's a strange freedom in that kind of silence. But there's also loneliness. At work, my reputation grew in quiet rooms. Emails carried my name when something needed to be trusted. Meetings paused for my input. My ideas moved forward without needing to be dressed up in excitement. At home, I was still the calm one, the easy one, the one who didn't seem to struggle. It took me years to understand that being unshaken was being misread as being untouched. And maybe the hardest part was realizing they weren't trying to be unfair. They just didn't know how to measure effort that didn't come with noise. Belle wasn't pretending to work hard. She was working hard in her own way. Navigating rooms, reading people, chasing opportunities that required constant energy. But her effort was visible. And visibility has a way of feeling more real to people who aren't looking closely. Meanwhile, my discipline built foundations. No one admired because they never saw the cracks I prevented. I stopped trying to compete with that. I stopped waiting for the moment when someone would finally say, "We see what you carry," because I began to understand something quietly devastating. They didn't need to see it. As long as the story made sense to them, the details didn't matter. And in our family, the story had already been written years ago. Belle was the driven one, the vibrant one, the impressive one. I was the steady one, the quiet one, the one who apparently could be doing more. Once I saw that clearly, I stopped trying to rewrite their version of me. Instead, I started building a version of myself that didn't need their narration to feel real. The first call came late in the evening. It was one of those nights where the day had already taken everything out of me. I was in that quiet, drained state where saying yes feels easier than asking questions. My phone lit up with Belle's name, and when I answered her voice didn't sound polished the way it usually did. It sounded tight, frayed around the edges. She told me she had miscalculated the timing of her commissions, said a payment hadn't cleared when she expected it to, said the landlord wasn't being patient anymore. There was a notice on her door, and she described it in a way that made it feel humiliating, like the paper itself was judging her. I listened longer than I probably should have. Fear has a certain tone. It cuts through history. It makes you forget old patterns and focus only on the urgency in front of you. And this was my sister. We grew up in the same house. Whatever our differences, that bond doesn't disappear just because adulthood complicates it. Helping felt logical, not dramatic, not sacrificial, just practical. I opened my banking app while she was still talking. I didn't even ask how much she had saved or what her backup plan was. I didn't pause to calculate what it would mean for my own budget. I just transferred the money. When I told her it was done, she exhaled in a way that made me feel useful, needed, steady. I said it was temporary, just a bridge, just one rough month. I believed that when I said it. The next month didn't feel like a pattern at first. It felt like bad timing again, a delay, a contract that hadn't finalized, a client who needed another week. She sounded less panicked this time, more familiar, like we had already crossed into a space where asking me wasn't extraordinary. And I didn't challenge it, because real family support isn't supposed to feel transactional, right? That's what I told myself. You don't keep score. You don't demand explanations. You step in when someone stumbles. So I sent the second payment. After that, something subtle shifted. The urgency in her voice softened. The gratitude shortened. The conversation stretched longer but carried less detail. Instead of explaining what had gone wrong, she started explaining what it was about to go right. This next month will be better. I have something lined up. It's just timing. There was always a future where everything stabilized. It just never seemed to arrive in the present. Slowly, my own habits began adjusting around the expectation. I stopped browsing flights when friends talked about weekend trips. I told myself I preferred staying home anyway. I chose cheaper groceries without consciously deciding to. I delayed replacing my shoes when the soles started thinning. I canceled plans that required spending money, and when people asked why I said I was busy, none of it felt dramatic. It felt responsible. That's the dangerous part. Responsibility can disguise self-erasure so well. You don't notice the line between generosity and obligation until it's already blurred. By the 4th or 5th month, I wasn't waiting for her to call with a crisis. I started checking my calendar as the rent date approached. I began calculating my own balance with her apartment, already subtracted the way you account for electricity or insurance. It became a fixed bill in my mind, except it wasn't mine. I adjusted my budget quietly, moved numbers around, shifted savings goals further out. Told myself it was temporary every single time, even though temporary had started repeating in a rhythm that felt permanent. The worst part wasn't the money itself. I could afford it. My job was stable, my systems were intact. The worst part was how my own goals began shrinking without announcement. There were certifications I wanted to pursue, a course I kept postponing, a small upgrade to my workspace that would have made long nights easier. I told myself none of it was urgent. I could wait. Her emergency felt more immediate than my progress, and I didn't talk about it. Not to Mom, not to Dad. They praised Belle's persistence the way they always had. They admired her hustle. They heard the excitement in her voice when she described upcoming opportunities, and they assumed stability was just around the corner. No one asked how the rent was being covered. No one wondered why the apartment remained untouched by consequences month after month. My sacrifice had no sound, so it had no shape in their eyes. Sometimes I would look at my bank statement and feel a flicker of something I didn't want to name. Not anger, not exactly. Something heavier. A quiet tightening in my chest that made grocery aisles feel longer than they should. I still loved her. That never changed. I wanted her safe. I wanted her stable. I wanted her to succeed without the humiliation of eviction or the chaos of scrambling for housing. But I also began noticing small details that unsettled me. Her social media stayed bright. Events, dinners, photos. The lifestyle didn't shrink the way mine quietly did. When she talked about her schedule, it sounded full. When I talked about mine, it sounded careful. She stopped saying thank you every time. She started saying, next month will be different. The sentence lost its apology and gained expectation, and I adjusted again. I told myself this was what being strong looked like. Quietly absorbing weight so someone else didn't have to. I told myself, real help isn't counted. Real love doesn't keep a ledger. But my body knew something before my mind admitted it. I started hesitating before checking my account. I avoided conversations about money with friends because it felt complicated to explain. I noticed I was more tired, not physically, but mentally, like I was carrying a responsibility that no one else acknowledged. Mom never questioned it. She heard Belle's movement and assumed momentum. She saw energy and translated it into ambition. Stability to her meant things were working. She didn't look for the hands holding them together. Dad saw no crisis, so he assumed there was none. And I stayed silent because speaking up would mean revealing that the story they believed wasn't complete. I convinced myself it would end once she found her footing. That this was just a season, that I could endure seasons. What I didn't realize was that seasons turn into climates when you don't mark their end. And without ever sitting down to agree to it, without signing anything or saying it out loud, I became responsible for a life that wasn't mine to finance. It didn't happen in one decision. It happened in a series of small, quiet yeses. The email from her supervisor arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, tucked between budget reports and calendar invites. Kayla almost missed it. Subject line leadership recognition. Q4 review. She opened it expecting revisions. Instead, she found her name framed in language she had never seen directed at her before. Exceptional reliability, strategic clarity, trusted across departments, recommended for senior oversight next fiscal year. She read it twice, then a third time, not because she doubted it, but because it felt unfamiliar to see her steadiness translated into praise. Her supervisor had always been fair but never indulgent. This was specific, intentional, earned. There was no confetti, no applause, just a steady warmth spreading through her chest. That evening, she forwarded the email to no one. She didn't send it to her parents, who had once responded to a promotion with, "That's nice, sweetheart. Does it come with travel?" She didn't send it to Belle, who would have replied with a string of heart emojis before pivoting to a story about a brand event or a rooftop launch party. Instead, she saved it in a folder titled Personal and closed her laptop. Later that week, she met Tessa Morgan for coffee, her one friend who never mistook quiet for small. Tessa had a way of listening that felt like being handed a mirror. She noticed things Kayla rarely said out loud. "You look different," Tessa said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Not tired, not stressed. Different." Kayla laughed. "Is that good different?" "It's grounded," Tessa said, "like you finally believe something." Kayla stirred her coffee slowly. "I got recognized at work." Tessa's smile widened. "Of course you did. It's not that," Kayla said. I realized something. They see me." She hadn't meant to say it that way, but once it was spoken, she couldn't take it back. "They see the work," she continued. "The consistency. The things that don't look flashy but keep everything from falling apart." Tessa tilted her head. "And that's new." Kayla paused. "No," she admitted. "Being seen for it is." There was a quiet between them that felt heavier than the words. Tessa didn't press, but she didn't let it drift either. "You've always been the infrastructure," she said gently, "but you don't have to be the invisible one." That sentence lingered long after the coffee cooled. Infrastructure, invisible. Kayla drove home, thinking about how often she had confused those two things. In her family, the person who held things steady rarely received applause. Stability was expected. Visibility was celebrated. Belly's life was full of visible moments, curated posts, launch events, photo backdrops, and applause. Even her struggles arrived with lighting, tearful captions, filtered vulnerability, public resilience. Kayla's work lived in spreadsheets and long-term projections, in quiet deadlines met before anyone worried, in decisions that prevented problems no one would ever know had been close. For years, she had told herself that substance mattered more than story, but she was beginning to understand something harder in her family. Story was substance. That realization didn't make her angry. It made her observant. When Belle texted the following Friday, "Hey, can we talk later?" Just a quick thing. Kayla felt something unfamiliar. Not dread, not obligation, recognition. The timing, the phrasing, the soft preface before the ask. She didn't open the message right away. She let it sit. It struck her then how mapped it all had become. The rhythm, the escalation, the reassurance that it was temporary, followed by a reason it couldn't be. Patterns are comforting when they're predictable. They are exhausting when they're permanent. Kayla found herself noticing the invisible boundaries she had never drawn. The way her calendar bent, the way her savings goals adjusted, the way her own plans waited patiently in the background as if they understood they were secondary. She had never framed it as sacrifice. It was simply what you did when you were the steady one. But the email from her supervisor had shifted something subtle inside her. If strangers in conference rooms could see her value clearly, why did she shrink it at home? She wasn't resentful. That surprised her most of all. She was clear. When she finally called Belle back, her voice sounded calm even to herself. She listened. She nodded. She asked questions. But underneath it all was a quiet awareness she could predict the arc of this conversation before it unfolded. Belle wasn't manipulative. She was accustomed to rescue arriving, accustomed to Kayla absorbing impact. Kayla ended the call politely, promising to think about it. Afterward, she sat in the stillness of her apartment and noticed her heartbeat wasn't racing. It wasn't heavy either. It was steady. The invitation to Thanksgiving arrived 2 days later in the family group chat, full of exclamation marks and pie emojis. Her mother wrote about tradition and gratitude. Her father added a thumbs up. Belle reacted with a turkey and a heart. Kayla stared at the thread longer than necessary. For the first time, she imagined the table as more than ritual. She imagined the stories that would be told around it, the roles that would be reinforced without anyone consciously assigning them. She didn't feel afraid. She felt prepared. Not for a confrontation, not yet, but for something quieter, a shift, an invisible line drawn in ink only she could see. And as the holiday approached, her confidence did not arrive in fireworks or declarations. It arrived in smaller ways, sleeping well, speaking clearly, letting requests linger before responding. For the first time in years, Kayla wasn't bracing for Thanksgiving. She was arriving differently. And she had the quiet sense that something inside her would not return to its old position once she did. The dining room smelled like sage and roasted turkey, the windows slightly fogged from the oven's steady heat. China plates were arranged with careful symmetry, candles burned low and golden. Everything looked exactly the way Thanksgiving was supposed to look. Kayla sat halfway down the table, napkin folded neatly in her lap, hands resting lightly against her knees. Across from her, Belle leaned back in her chair, one ankle crossed over the other, phone face down beside her wine glass. Their father carved the turkey with deliberate focus, as if precision could prevent tension from forming. Their mother stood to give the traditional toast. She lifted her glass, smiling in that polished way that always seemed meant for an invisible audience. "I'm so grateful," she began, voice warm and clear, "for my beautiful family, for my daughters so different, but both special in their own ways." Kayla felt the familiar tightening in her shoulders. So different had never meant neutral. Their mother's eyes drifted toward Belle first. "Belle, honey, your drive inspires me. The way you put yourself out there, the risks you take. It takes courage to build something visible in this world." Bella's lips curved into a modest smile, chin dipping slightly as though she were embarrassed by praise she fully expected. Then their mother turned to Kayla, and Kayla, she continued, her tone softening in a way that felt almost indulgent. "Well, we're thankful you're steady, even if you've always been the lazier one." The word landed with a soft, almost playful laugh attached to it, as if it were harmless, as if it were family shorthand everyone understood. A few faint chuckles followed, nervous, automatic. Their father cleared his throat but didn't interrupt. Belle didn't laugh. She smirked. It was subtle. Just the slightest lift at the corner of her mouth, a flicker of satisfaction that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. But Kayla saw it. Lazy. The word moved through her like an echo from another decade. Childhood mornings, report cards, chores completed without acknowledgement, achievements described as expected. She felt the old reflex rise, the urge to smile, to deflect, to shrink, so the moment could pass cleanly. Instead, she inhaled slowly. The room felt heavier than the turkey on the platter. Even the candles seemed to flicker lower. Her mother went on oblivious. Not everyone is meant to chase big dreams, she added lightly. Some people are just comfortable. There it was again. The narrative, soft, harmless, permanent. Weeks earlier flickered through her mind. Exceptional reliability, strategic clarity, words that describe the same traits, now being reduced to laziness. She lifted her head. Her voice when she spoke was gentle. "Mom," she said, not sharply, not defensively, just clearly. "That's an interesting word." The table stilled. Her mother blinked, glass hovering midair. "Oh, sweetheart, you know what I mean. You've never been as ambitious as Belle." Kayla nodded once. "I see." Silence expanded between them, thick and humming. The clink of silverware from the kitchen sounded distant. Belle shifted in her chair. "Can we not make this weird?" she said lightly, though her tone carried an edge. Kayla turned toward her sister, her expression neutral. There was no anger in her face, no heat. "I'm not making it weird," she said, softly. "I just think it's important we're accurate." Her father finally set down the carving knife. The scrape against porcelain sounded too loud. "Kayla," he began cautiously, "it's Thanksgiving." "I know," she replied. She folded her hands together on the table fingers, interlacing calmly. The movement itself felt symbolic, like closing a door she had left open for too long. "If I'm lazy," she continued, eyes returning to her mother, "then I should probably stop doing lazy things." Confusion creased her mother's forehead. "What are you talking about?" Kayla held the silence for half a breath longer than necessary. "I've been paying $4,500 a month toward Belle's rent." The number did not rise in volume. It didn't need to. It dropped into the center of the table like a stone into still water. For a moment, no one moved. Belle's smirk evaporated first. Her spine straightened, wine glass pausing halfway to her lips. "Why would you say that?" she whispered, color draining from her face. Kayla didn't look at her yet. "I started helping when things were tight," she said evenly. "It was supposed to be temporary." Her father's brows drew together. $4,500, he repeated as if testing the reality of it. Kayla nodded. "Every month." Her mother's hand lowered slowly, glass meeting the table with a faint tremor. "That can't be right," she said. "Belle would have told us." Belle's breathing had changed, shallow, quick. "It's not like that," she said, voice sharpening. "It's just until what?" Kayla asked quietly. There was no accusation in her tone, only clarity. The room felt smaller now, the golden glow harsher. Even the air seemed thinner. "I didn't bring it up before," Kayla continued, "because I didn't need recognition for it. But I don't think lazy is the right word for someone covering $4,500 a month." Her mother stared at her as though seeing her for the first time and not liking what she found. Why didn't you tell us? She demanded. Kayla's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something steadier. Because it wasn't about telling you. Belle's hands trembled slightly as she set down her glass. You didn't have to say it like that, she muttered. I didn't raise my voice, Kayla replied, and she hadn't. That was the part that unsettled them most. There were no tears, no shaking, no explosion to dismiss as overreaction. Just a fact placed carefully in the center of the table. Her father leaned back slowly, eyes moving between his daughters, as if recalibrating years of assumptions. Her mother's composure fractured at the edges. We've always supported both of you equally, she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction now. Kayla felt something inside her settle. Not triumph, relief. I'm not asking for applause, she said. I'm just not accepting labels that aren't true. The candles flickered again, shadows shifting across the walls. The carefully arranged dinner no longer looked symmetrical. Plates had gone untouched. The turkey cooled. Belle looked smaller, somehow stripped of her earlier confidence. Their parents looked stunned, caught between loyalty and revelation. Kayla reached for her water glass, took a slow sip, and set it down with measured precision. I won't be covering the rent anymore, she added calmly. No one spoke. The silence that followed wasn't the old kind, the heavy, dismissive one that pressed her back into place. This silence was different. It was rearranging everything. The dishes were still stacked in the sink when it began. The dining room had emptied in fragments, chairs scraping back too quickly, half-finished plates abandoned. Now the house felt smaller, the air sharper. The clatter of silverware from the kitchen had stopped. Even the television in the den had been muted, as if the walls themselves were bracing. Kayla stood near the hallway that led to the living room, coat draped over her arm. She had intended to leave quietly. Don't you dare walk out like that. Her mother's voice cracked through the house. Kayla turned slowly. They had gathered in the living room. Now her father, standing stiffly by the fireplace, Belle perched at the edge of the sofa, eyes red but dry. Her mother stood in the center of the room, arms crossed tightly over her chest. You humiliated this family tonight, her mother said, color rising in her face. On Thanksgiving, Kayla's expression didn't shift. I answered a comment about me. You blindsided us? Her father added, his tone strained. That wasn't the time or place. Kayla met his eyes. When would have been? The question lingered unanswered. Belle let out a sharp laugh that carried no humor. You always do this, she said, pushing to her feet. You act like you're above everything, like you're the martyr. Kayla looked at her sister fully now. I never asked to be a martyr. Oh, please. Belle's voice rose. You think throwing money at a problem makes you superior. You think that gives you the right to embarrass me. It wasn't about embarrassing you, Kayla replied evenly. It was about correcting a narrative. Belle's jaw tightened. You're selfish, she snapped. You didn't care how that would affect me. My brand depends on perception. You don't understand how fragile that is. Kayla absorbed the words without flinching. Exactly, she said quietly. Belle blinked. What's that supposed to mean? It means I do understand. I understand that perception matters to you more than reality. The room pulsed with tension. Her mother stepped forward. Enough. Kayla, you will apologize to your sister right now. Kayla shook her head once. Not dramatically, not defiantly, just firmly. No, The word was soft, final. Her father exhaled sharply. You're being disrespectful. I'm being honest. You've always resented her, Belle said, voice trembling now, not with sadness but fury. You hate that I built something bigger than your little office job. Kayla felt the old instinct to defend herself flicker and fade. This isn't about comparison, she said. It's about boundaries. Belle's eyes flashed. If you cut me off like this, I swear I will tell people exactly who you are. I'll make sure everyone knows how manipulative you've been. You think your company wouldn't care about that? The threat hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Their mother gasped softly. Their father shifted, uncertain. Kayla did not raise her voice. You can say whatever you want, she replied. The truth doesn't change. Belle stepped closer, close enough that Kayla could see the tremor in her hands. You owe me, she hissed. Family supports each other. I have supported you, Kayla said, for years. And now you're just done, Belle demanded. Yes. The word landed with more force than anything else she had said all night. I am done sending money. Completely, Kayla continued. Not reduced, not paused. Done. Her mother stared at her as if she were speaking a foreign language. You would let your sister struggle. Kayla's voice remained steady. She is capable, and I am not responsible for maintaining an image I didn't create. Her father's shoulders sagged frustration, giving way to something closer to disbelief. This isn't who you are, he muttered. Kayla slipped her coat fully onto her shoulders. No, she said gently. It's exactly who I am. For a moment, no one moved. The house felt suspended in a strange, echoing quiet, no longer shocked, just altered. Belle's breathing was uneven. Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Her father looked away. Kayla reached for the doorknob. I hope one day we can talk without pretending, she said, not unkindly. Then she opened the door. The cold night air met her face like a reset button, clean, sharp, undeniable. Behind her, no one called her back. And she didn't look over her shoulder. The first month after Thanksgiving was the loudest. Belle called twice the week rent was due. The first time her voice was sharp, still edged with disbelief. The second time, it was thinner, less indignant, more urgent. Kayla let both calls go to voicemail. The messages shifted in tone. From accusation to negotiation, from you're overreacting to can we just figure something out? By the third month, the calls stopped entirely. Without the automatic deposit, Belle's lifestyle tightened. The apartment she had insisted was non-negotiable suddenly became negotiable. A few carefully framed posts disappeared. Brand partnerships slowed when travel did. There were subtle changes at first, fewer rooftop photos, more indoor lighting, then more obvious ones. A move announced with curated optimism, downsizing to focus on growth. Kayla watched none of it directly. News traveled through extended family, through careful updates her mother delivered with a mixture of defensiveness and forced neutrality. She's adjusting, her mother would say over the phone, tone clipped. It's just temporary. The word temporary echoed differently now. Her parents' responses shifted in stages. At first there was distance, a cool politeness in texts and absence of the usual holiday invitations. Then came attempts at guilt disguised as concern. Families shouldn't keep score, her father said once. I'm not keeping score, Kayla replied. I'm keeping boundaries. The conversations grew shorter after that. Something unexpected happened in the quiet that followed. nothing collapsed. Kayla had half expected fallout at work, rumors, some invisible backlash from Belle's earlier threat. None came. Her projects continued, her promotion formalized. Her savings account, no longer quietly rerouted each month, began to grow in a way that felt both practical and symbolic. But the most noticeable change wasn't financial, it was internal. The anxiety she used to carry, the constant low hum of anticipating the next request, went silent. Her calendar felt like her own again. She booked a short trip she had postponed for years. She replaced her aging car without calculating how it would affect someone else's rent. Small decisions made without negotiation accumulated into something steadier than relief. Peace, she realized, wasn't loud. It wasn't triumph or vindication. It was waking up without rehearsing conversations. It was answering her phone without bracing. It was understanding that love and access were not the same thing. Distance clarified things in ways proximity never had. She could see her family more honestly now, not as villains, but as people who had confused visibility with value for so long that they mistook consistency for complacency. Her mother eventually softened first. I may not have understood everything, she admitted during a quiet call in early spring. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was closer than before. Kayla didn't press for more. Boundaries she was learning weren't punishments. They were definitions. They told other people where she ended and they began. Belle sent one message months later. Short, careful, no emojis. I figured it out. Kayla stared at the words for a long time before replying. I'm glad you did. And she meant it. Self-respect, she discovered, was not about cutting people off in anger. It was about standing still long enough for the ground beneath you to feel solid. It was about allowing others to face consequences that were never yours to absorb. Thanksgiving had rearranged more than a dinner table. It had rearranged the story she had been cast in. For the first time, Kayla wasn't the quiet infrastructure holding everything up. She was simply herself, and that was enough. Sometimes the bravest thing we do isn't fighting louder, it's choosing peace over performance. Kayla didn't win an argument, she reclaimed her place in her own life. And maybe that's what boundaries really are, quiet decisions that protect your future. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. I'd love to hear how you've navigated family expectations and self-respect. And if stories like this resonate, stay close. There's more to explore together.